Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Imran Garda, sitting in for Riz Khan. Does the US government hide more than it reveals to the American people? In the past, Washington has been accused of secretly starting wars, toppling governments, and experimenting on its own soldiers. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, according to former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. In his latest book, 63 Documents the Government Doesn't Want You to Read. He also says the US government was complicit in the attacks of September the 11th, or at the very least, knew everything and did nothing to stop them. The CIA widely promoted the Warren Commission report, saying President John F. Kennedy was killed by a lone gunman in 1963 to deflect suspicion of its own involvement in the assassination. And Washington deliberately ignored the 1994 Rwanda genocide, despite regular briefings to the White House warning about an impending bloodbath. Well, today we ask, among other things, conspiracy or no conspiracy, how can Americans make their government more accountable? Remember, you can call in with your questions and comments. We also welcome your SMS messages or emails on the show. And joining us now from New York is Jesse Ventura himself. Now, Jesse Ventura was a U.S. Navy SEAL who fought in Vietnam and later had a successful career as a professional wrestler. Welcome to the program, Governor Ventura. Great pleasure having you with us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I've been perusing through your book. I haven't read all of it, but it's been fascinating. Why 63? Why not 1,000 documents?
Well, we probably could have did 1,000 documents, and the book would probably be about 4 times thicker. We chose 63, Dick Russell and I, because that happened to be the year that President John F. Kennedy was murdered. So we thought that was a good number to choose. We had to make the book readable to where, again, it wouldn't be as thick as a dictionary. And so we attempted to pick out 63 documents that very greatly troubled us when we read them. And the first thing I want to state is all these documents are in the public domain. We didn't steal any. We haven't violated any security violations or any such thing. They're all out there. The problem is mainstream media won't report it, and you certainly have to go digging to find it. And in the back of the book, in the epilogue, we list places where interested readers can do their own research. And we also reprinted every one of the documents in the book so the reader can read the documents for themselves.
So remind us about your thesis regarding John F. Kennedy.
Well, if anyone saw my television show, Conspiracy Theories, this past fall, we had a confession. E. Howard Hunt, one of the infamous characters of Watergate, who was a CIA operative his entire life, did a deathbed confession to his son, St. John Hunt. And he did it audio, visual, as well as in writing. He stated that it was a CIA operation to remove the president. It was called the Big Event. Naturally, I imagine it would be called the Big Event to remove a president by assassination. And he named who was involved. And if you're a connoisseur of studying the Kennedy killing, the names will ring familiar. William Harvey of the CIA, who at that time was in charge of apparently their assassination teams, and David Sanchez Morales. And David Morales is also well known because later on in 1967, he was in Bolivia when they captured Che Guevara and put him against a wall, shot him and killed him. And Morales used to always wear Che Guevara's Rolex as almost a trophy on his wrist.
But people can say anything on their deathbed, can't they? I mean, there are stories, probably apocryphal, that Charles Darwin on his deathbed said, "Burn my books, evolution's a lie." I mean, these things are fairy tales to many people because they don't have empirical evidence.
Well, that's just one piece of evidence. I'm not going solely on a confession from E. Howard Hunt, but if you recall, there was photographs taken of 3 tramps who were captured in Dealey Plaza, and the old tramp, St. John Hunt, identified as being his father. So I think that a father or a son could recognize his father. That's a pretty solid recognition. And I've seen the photograph, and if it's not E. Howard Hunt, then he has a twin.
Okay, before we get into deeper detail regarding some of these conspiracy theories. I wonder.
Wait. These are not conspiracy theories. This is a book on documents.
Okay, fair enough.
It's a book
but
on documents.
there's also a debate as to the interpretation of the documents. You would agree?
Well, you read them for yourself and interpret them yourself.
Okay.
I mean, it's in black and white in print. I don't think there's much on interpreting them.
But before we actually get into some of these, and I'm going to bring up quite a few, 9/11 included, I want to ask you if you would agree that you represent a deeper fundamental distrust in the United States, a distrust of authority in general, authority good or bad, and it's something that's intrinsic to American society. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes and no. I think that Thomas Jefferson was correct when he said dissension's the greatest form of patriotism. And I think it's also imperative in a free democratic society for its people to be vigilant, to pay attention, and to hold their elected officials' feet to the fire, so to speak. If you don't do that, you will get bad government. And so, to me, we're not the sinister ones. You know, we found out last year the United States government classified 16 million documents top secret. 16 million. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. That must be every document they put out is now top secret. And I believe that we as citizens here have every right to know, because it's our money, our tax dollars that pays for this stuff, pays for not only the documents, but what the documents represent. And we have every right to know where our tax dollars are going and what they're being spent on.
Okay, let's read an excerpt from your latest book about some of the concerns you've had regarding the events of September the 11th. You wrote, "The question that's haunted me from day one is how come the world's biggest military superpower was somehow oblivious to rogue airliners in American airspace for more than an hour? And our top brass seemed so befuddled in terms of dealing with hijackers, apparently using these 4 planes as flying bombs. Why couldn't our fighter jets intercept at least one of them?" I mean, you seem to imply that there was almost an effort by Washington to ensure that the attacks happened. I wonder, aren't you maybe confusing complicity with incompetence? Could people have not got it wrong on that day?
Well, not when not when we show the documents from June 1st, 2001 that changed the policy. If you want to look at government and understand when something's going on that shouldn't be, government runs under standard operating procedures most of the time. When those procedures are violated, that's usually the time that you better start looking close. And January 1st of 2001, our procedures were changed, ironically, a couple months right before 9/11. Up until that time, it was up to base commanders to make the call. That if the FAA called and said a plane was in trouble or what have you was going on in the air, the base commander could make the determination, scramble the jets, and send them airborne. June 1st of that year, that policy was changed. And it was changed that no airplanes could be scrambled unless they received permission from the DoD, the Department of Defense, which meant you would have a stand down simply by Don Rumsfeld not answering the phone. And if you go back and look on September 11th, for over 2 hours, nobody could find Don Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense. Now, I guess you're going to tell me that's just circumstantial, but I believe in what Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty said. Nothing just happens. Everything is planned.
Let's take a call now from John in Canada. John, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My question is this, that after 9/11, when George Bush and Cheney and his team made a case United Nations to attack Iraq, they said that all those hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. How come U.S. didn't attack Saudi Arabia based on that fact, which is the United Nations rules that if you're under attack, you're entitled to engage in war against enemy? Why U.S. didn't do that? In fact, Saudi Arabia still is a base for U.S. military now on as we're talking right now. Thank you.
Fair enough. John from Canada talking about perhaps motive and if it was the case that Saudi Arabia, Saudi citizens had attacked, then they should have attacked Saudi Arabia. I'm presuming he agrees with you with regards to 9/11.
He's exactly correct. That was what caused me initially to be a skeptic. I believed 9/11 up until that point. And all of a sudden, President Bush decides we're going to attack Iraq.
But the 9/11 hijackers were not Afghan, nor were they Iraqi. So that
that's the point I'm getting. Let me finish. Let me talk.
Go ahead.
Okay. That's what got me initially to start doubting 9/11 when he announced we were going to invade Iraq. Because I said, Iraq? I said, they told us all the hijackers were Saudis. There wasn't one hijacker from Iraq. Why would we invade Iraq? It seemed I could put it into this scenario. If you go back to Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, so let's go invade Korea. After all, they're Asian too.
But the U.S. government used it as a pretext. Fair enough. They used it as a pretext to do whatever it wanted to do. But that doesn't mean they did it to themselves, does it? I mean, the Russians may have used 9/11 as a pretext to further their policies against the Chechens, the Chinese against the Uyghurs, Colombia against the FARC rebels, Ariel Sharon versus the Palestinians. That doesn't mean they were also involved in 9/11.
No, it doesn't. But if you take a look at what's called a false flag operation, before every war, there's generally a false flag operation. I was teaching at Harvard in 2004 when McNamara came through. I'm a Vietnam veteran. Well, McNamara was getting ready to die, so I guess he had to make good, and he admitted the Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. For those that don't remember, the Gulf of Tonkin incident was where they told us the North Vietnamese had fired at 2 U.S. ships, which of course is an act of war in international waters, and that was the catalyst that put us into the Vietnam War, where 58,000 of my generation were killed, probably 1 million Vietnamese killed, and now they admit in 2004 it never happened. It was made up. Our media went along with it. Then we of course, can go to World War II, the Ruckstag fire in Germany, where they blamed the Soviet Union. But it turned out the Germans or the Nazis had done it to themselves. False flag operations seems to be the standard operating procedure of how to get into wars. And I guess they use the old cliche, if it's worked once, it'll work again.
As a former Navy SEAL, as you mentioned, who fought in the Vietnam War, do you have any regrets over anything or everything you did?
I have regrets over everything. Had John F. Kennedy lived, there wouldn't have been a Vietnam War. When you start studying what John F. Kennedy was doing at the time, and there's a great book called JFK and the Unspeakable, the author's name is Douglas, read that book, and it'll lay out the whole thing. Kennedy had already ordered the first 1,000 troops out of Vietnam by December, and he had told everyone after he was reelected, we would be completely out of Vietnam by 65. Well, there were people that didn't want that to happen. He wouldn't invade Cuba. Now he was going to pull us from Vietnam, and a lot of money is made off of war. You know, look at Cuba. Look in my book at Operation Northwoods, where the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs presented to McNamara and Kennedy an option that our CIA and our Army, our military, was going to attack certain U.S. cities and make it look like Cuba did it to get the country all up in arms to support an invasion of Cuba. These are facts. These are documents here. I'm not making it up or using an opinion.
Do you think that there's ever a justification for a just war?
Sure, if you're legitimately attacked and there's a threat to your nation's own shores. Sure, there can be just wars, but we haven't had one since World War II, in my opinion.
Is Libya a just war at the moment?
Libya's between a rock and a hard place when you look at it. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. You certainly don't want genocide to take place where Gaddafi can use his superior military power to slaughter his people that oppose him. But then on the flip side, if it's indeed a civil war, I always like to say this about Vietnam. There wasn't one Vietnamese that fought in the U.S. Civil War, so why did we fight in theirs?
Here's what you wrote about why you think the Clinton administration ignored the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, where Hutu mobs massacred more than 800,000 Tutsis and moderates of their own tribe. You wrote, clearly there was nothing in Rwanda for corporate America to profit from. And it seems today that's the only time we get involved. If there's no oil or lithium or what have you, we really don't have time. Humanitarian reasons aren't good enough. There's got to be financial gain. So we turned our back on one of the worst mass murders in history. Let's take a call now from Veron in Texas, because I understand that Veron wants to talk about Rwanda as well. Go ahead, Veron.
Yes, my simple question to Mr. Ventura is that what type of solution do we need as a Congolese? Because we all know what you just said in the book is true. But so what type of solution do we supposed to do to liberate Congo from all this conspiracy done by Clinton administration? Thank you very much.
You're talking about, Veron, are you still there?
Yes.
You're talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yes, because we know the massacre that happened in Rwanda affect the Congolese people.
Okay.
So right now we have a president who are Rwandese in the government and who killed Kabila, who was the Congolese man, and we don't even know how he died.
Okay, fair point, Veron. I mean, Jesse Ventura, where I would agree with you and with Veron to a great extent is if intervention or interest had to be based on death tolls, the Democratic Republic of Congo would be top of the list for everybody, for governments, for media. It's something like 6 million people have died as a result of conflict there since the mid-1990s. How would you respond to Veron?
Well, again, I can't really, because I've never focused on the Congo. I've never read about the Congo. I happened to read about Rwanda this winter. I read about the general in Rwanda from the UN. He was a Canadian gentleman that headed the UN forces there. They left him so understaffed, and he stated in his book that had I had a mere 20,000 troops, I could have prevented the whole thing. I can't speak to the Congo. I apologize. There's only so many things I can study at once, and this book kept me very busy doing the 63 documents that are in it, and unfortunately none of them dealt with the Congo.
Fair enough. I admire your honesty and sincerity there. I want to talk a little bit about WikiLeaks now. Clearly you endorse WikiLeaks, and you have no doubts about the veracity of those hundreds of thousands of documents that came out of WikiLeaks. How significant do you think was the impact of WikiLeaks on this relationship between the government and the citizens that the government is accountable to?
Well, what I found amazing was they were all these people in the United States who are vying to become our next president, who are in high positions in our government, demanded that Julian Assange be charged with treason. And I sat back when I heard that, and I only went to high school. I went in the U.S. military. I've been a mayor and a governor. But I know this much. Don't you have to be a citizen of the country to be charged with treason?
Fair point. Fair point.
He's an Australian who runs his site out of Switzerland. And yet all these big-time officials here are demanding him be charged with treason. It's laughable.
Governor Ventura, here's a question. How come these hundreds of thousands of cables never once intimated that 9/11 was an inside job or that the U.S. government killed JFK?
Well, I don't know. Have you read the 100,000 cables? As I understand it, not all of them have been released. He's only released certain ones. You would have to ask them that. Why they don't. Or maybe by chance nothing was written about those two events of which they got them. You're asking me a question there that I don't have any idea of because I'm not part of the leaking of it. I would prefer to look at this Bradley Manning, the young man they're accusing of leaking these cables. Currently, they're holding him in Quantico in solitary confinement, and he's been charged. He could be charged in prison for 52 years. Well, I find it very interesting that the first thing that was released was a video of a helicopter massacring innocent people on a street corner. Now, the whistleblower Manning is in prison for releasing that, but the people who murdered these people are going free, and Manning is the culprit and not the men in the chopper who committed murder. It's a classic case of kill the messenger, not the message.
Another fair point. I can't disagree with you there. Now, your book is dedicated to Congressman Ron Paul, who's a Republican. You're an independent. Now, Ron Paul's he's been defined as the ideological brain of the Tea Party movement. And some of the offshoots of the Tea Party movement believe that Barack Obama is a secret Muslim, that he faked his birth certificate, and the like. Are you comfortable being lumped into the same category as these people?
No, because I don't buy for 1 minute Ron Paul is the whatever you called him of the Tea Party. I don't believe that. If someone's labeling him that, they're wrong. Ron Paul is a guy who speaks his mind, who follows the Constitution. And let's talk about this Tea Party for a moment. Where were the Tea Partiers when George Bush was president? And they say that they're constitutional people. They want everything done according to the Constitution. I agree with them in the Bill of Rights. Where were they during George Bush's administration when the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were being assaulted beyond belief? I found it amazing that they showed up the minute Barack Obama became president, and I'm not an Obama supporter either. Remember, I'm a true independent. I dislike both of these parties equally. They're both equally as bad as each other. Let me put it this way on the two-party, as Ralph Nader called it, the two-party dictatorship that runs the United States. It's very much like if you walk in the grocery store and if you go to the soft drink department, the only thing you're going to find is Pepsi and Coke, one slightly sweeter than the other, but both colas. There's no root beer, 7-Up, Orange, or anything else, Mountain Dew. That's what we have in the United States today. But to equate that somehow the Tea Party and Ron Paul are aligned together, I think is completely wrong.
Okay, we don't have too much time left. What's this about you believing that the government can also manipulate the weather?
Well, I showed that on my show Conspiracy Theory. I knew nothing about it until I went up to Alaska and saw this thing they call HAARP, H-A-A-R-P. There's a book written by Dr. Nick Begich called Angels Don't Play This HAARP, and it's 50 antennas that shoot 50,000 watts of low-level sound up to the ionosphere, and that's the layer right before outer space, and they ricochet it back to Earth. We got a demonstration on it, and it can control the weather. It can knock planes out of the air. As Nick Begich said, Governor, this is the death ray. And so you be the judge. And whenever HAARP is ramped up, all them 50 antennas, you see what looks like the northern lights. And it was interesting because the tsunami that hit Indonesia a few years ago, there was no earthquake or anything. It just showed up. And witnesses said prior to the tsunami, they saw the northern lights. Well, I got news for you. From Indonesia, you can't see the northern lights. You need to be in Minnesota or Alaska or somewhere to see the northern lights. So maybe they were testing it and it screwed up. And what are they going to do? Come out and admit, oops, we messed up on that one?
Well, Governor Ventura, you're 6'4" and you used to wrestle professionally, so I'm not going to argue with you on that one, although I want to. But
well, you don't have to argue with me. We can have a civil discussion. I simply go by facts of what I read. I'm patriotic. I served my country for 6 years, and I have every right to question my government and to ask questions about anything that goes on. In fact, that's what's wrong with this country today. It's turning into a bunch of lemmings who are being marched off the cliff without even looking left or right.
Jesse Ventura, it's been a great pleasure having you on the program. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us, and I look forward to reading the rest of the book. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Remember, you can watch a podcast of the show on iTunes. Today we're featuring our conversation with former CIA spies Robert and Dana Baer, who found love undercover. On the next show, can the United States wean itself away from its addiction to oil? And why is it falling behind in the race for alternative energy? Make sure to tune in for that, and we'll see you next time.
America.